I'm Sienna. I'm the kid.
I'm Sarah. I'm the mom.
This is Queer Kid Straight Mom.
Let's talk. Welcome back to Queer Kid Straight Mom. Today we're talking about the upcoming election and how Republicans have gone really all in on anti-trans advertising in this campaign season.
It's actually quite funny because in the last, we said we were going to do this episode, and in the last couple of weeks since we said that, every single news outlet is like, Republicans are going all in and on anti-trans advertising.
Yeah, really all in. As of October 9th, the Trump campaign and Republican groups have spent more than $21 million on anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ plus television ads, which is nearly a third of the roughly $66 million of television ad spending during that time period. It's a little mind-blowing considering how few people are transgender, that a third of their advertising money is going toward this issue. But Sienna, I don't know if you have even seen Trump's ad, the anti-trans one, because you're in Australia and you are so lucky that you are not inundated with these ads every time you watch TV.
I am blissfully free. In fairness, I can't really watch TV here, period. But point stands. Is it the one where he's like, Kamala's for they, them?
Yeah.
I haven't watched it. I've just seen that that's an ad.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
So, according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, 2 federal prisoners have received gender-affirming surgery. 2. As of December of 2022, 20 California inmates had received gender-affirming surgery. It's not very many people.
Do you happen to have a cost associated with each surgery? According to the California Commission on the Fair Administration of Justice, this is from 2008, but it's all using 2008 numbers, so, just assume that it probably gets jacked up a little bit from inflation. Using conservative rough projections, the commission estimates the annual costs of the present system, $137 million per year. The present system after implementation of the reforms, $232.7 million per year. And a system which imposes a maximum penalty of lifetime incarceration instead of the death penalty, $11.5 million per year. So, what's a major cost in the prison system is the death penalty. Having people on death row is incredibly expensive. The various methods that are used to murder people on death row are very expensive. So if you want to save some money in the prison system, don't worry about the 3 people per year who might need gender-affirming surgery or treatment, and instead worry about getting rid of the death penalty. That's my suggestion.
So many other options. And I mean, we know that they know there's not that much money being spent on this, but it's a good inflammatory talking point. He also says in there that Harris supports transgender surgery for illegal immigrant detainees. You're really only supposed to keep people in detention, like illegal immigrants in detention for 48 hours or something, which obviously doesn't happen. But the average length of stay for a person detained by ICE in 2024 is 47 days. Can you start the process and get gender-affirming surgery in 47 days?
No.
A waiting period of a year. For people in prison, for sure, even for people outside of prison, generally, it's a long wait, right? You have to talk to therapists and you don't just say, I'm going to do this, book a surgeon and go in and do it.
Yeah, no, when I was doing a consultation for a hysterectomy earlier this year, it was okay, so you need, if you're on private insurance, they'll usually let you get by with 1 letter of recommendation from a therapist. And 1 from a healthcare provider. If you're on Medicare, then you need to have 2 therapist letters. I assume that would also be the case for anyone who's having any treatment publicly funded by the government. And then you need to get all that paperwork through. And then I'm booking out like, 3 months right now. So end of the year at the earliest, if you were to schedule it today. So like, and that's for a hysterectomy, which is actually a less regulated, or not less regulated, but a less difficult procedure to obtain. So no, there's no way.
Like it just doesn't add up. Like so many things.
It's like the thing where he says that the children are going to school one day and coming back transgender. It's like they think all of our public institutions have just become little transgender factories.
That one just like teachers have to buy their own school supplies. And they think the schools have money for sex change operations.
Apparently.
Does anybody really think, like, I'm so curious to know if anybody really thinks that.
I would assume it's because, I mean, that's the argument that people have been making about Trump literally since he started his campaign, right? Is that, well, I mean, the way he words things isn't necessarily like factually accurate, like if you're going to look at the details, but I mean, he's getting at the real issues, and that's what I care about.
I suppose. However, even with that, a recent Gallup poll shows that transgender rights, all issues around them, are at the bottom of issues that voters care about. People are worried about the economy and security and this isn't something that like probably these people would even be thinking about if they weren't being blasted with ads about it. Like people aren't that interested.
And I mean, that's why we have the illegal immigrant sex change argument, because how can we make this something people will care about? We'll make it about immigration.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good point, actually, because that is something that people care about. Here in Montana, the angle on this issue that candidates have focused on is sports. That has been an issue that has come up in our state that legislators have tried to ban. So I think it feels like, people have, we can get people worked up about this.
But boys are boys and girls are girls. It's just common sense. But radical Missoula liberal Monica Turnell and her left-wing sidekicks in D.C. want to steal your daughter's opportunity. I'm Ryan Zinke, and I approve this message because girls deserve a level playing field.
So that's U.S. Representative candidate Ryan Zinke. I could barely keep a straight face every time. The music, like, it's so over the top. It's so ridiculous. Ryan Zinke is so worried about your daughters getting a fair shake on the playing field. And we know how much Ryan Zinke cares about your daughter's rights, right?
Hey, it could be worse. I read that one either in Ohio or Texas had a little girl getting tackled by like an adult male football player, which is so funny to me.
The shock and awe factor, I guess, of like making people imagine that their little girls are going to be playing soccer with like adult men. It's just like really funny. The Senate Leadership Fund, which is a super PAC that helps elect Republicans to the Senate, has poured money into anti-trans ads, specifically in Montana, because we have this situation where we've had Democrat Jon Tester in the Senate for many years. And, that's been like one of those really sort of precious blue senators from a red state, that like Republicans are really wanting to flip that seat this year.
Yeah, quick PSA to anyone who has not yet voted, please go out and vote for Jon Tester. I understand not particularly liking him at this point, but like he's much better than a Republican, and also literally, yes, Senate control hangs in the balance, and we would like Republicans to not have control of the Senate. So please go vote.
Yes. So the super PAC has poured money into some gems like this.
John Tester's not listening to us anymore. He's listening to them. Reasonable people tried to stop their woke farm program that excluded white farmers. But Tester voted to exclude white farmers anyway. And Tester ignored parents who don't want biological men competing in girls' sports. Tester voted to let men compete against our girls in their sports.
So actually, I hadn't noticed that, but now that you brought up that ad, it does. It says men playing with our girls, not boys.
Also, yeah, exactly, right? Because they know that actually, for anyone under the age of 13 or so, it doesn't matter. Girls and boys play together.
The one that just really turns my stomach has a mom and I guess presumably her daughter, her little girl, out on their front porch. And the daughter looks very, very sad.
Our girls' sports are under attack. Tester voted to let biological men compete against our girls in their sports. He even wanted to let men use girls' bathrooms and locker rooms. Tester's changed. He's turned into a liberal.
Again, men, girls. What John Tester actually did was twice that all. This is all I can find to explain what they're even spinning this way. He twice voted against amendments that were introduced by Alabama's Tommy Tuberville that would prohibit federal funds to entities that allow trans female students to participate in female sports. I think that and him supporting anti-discrimination policies in Montana is that's all I can come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them have been trying to spin support for the Equality Act because, it bans discrimination. Saying, oh, you want men in little girls' sports and bathrooms.
Because not wanting to discriminate is woke.
Yes.
Which is so problematic. And, it really just shines a light on how much of this is the people in power wanting to pit people without power against each other so they don't try to get power from them.
Yes. I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that even if a substantial portion of the US population isn't super comfortable with trans people, like you said, it's not a top of mind voting issue for the vast I would say probably the people for whom it is a top of mind voting issue are trans people, right? And everybody else, it's not a priority. And so what they're trying to do here is that they're trying to make it a priority for people who are being exploited in other ways, right? They're trying to use it as a way to drain Black and Latinx support from Harris, because you have some socially conservative people in those voting blocks who they think oh, this is an opportunity. They're trying to link it in people's minds with all this farm aid stuff. They're trying to use it as a way of getting poor white rural people to feel oh, the Democrats don't care about me. They only care about trans people and Black farmers, when in actuality, Democrats' policies would also be much, much better for those individuals. It's almost like Republicans know that their policies aren't good because they're determined entirely by what a confused 80-year-old man who's obsessed with tariffs thinks. So the only way that they can actually, quote unquote, win on policy is by making stuff up and having this elaborate set of mental gymnastics to pit people against each other.
Yeah. And some of it is not only transphobic. It's you mentioned the kind of targeting Black and Latinx voting groups. You remember Stephen Miller, aide to Donald Trump? He's really, really racist. So he has a PAC called America First Legal. They've spent more than $4 million on this radio ad in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit. Think about what those cities have in common.
Not long ago, everyone knew that you're either born a boy or girl. Not anymore. The Biden administration is pushing radical gender experiments on children, changing their names, clothes, identities, and bodies. Joe Biden and his left-wing allies push boys to take estrogen to appear more feminine. They push girls to take testosterone so they grow facial hair. Biden and progressive leaders promote puberty blockers to keep kids from developing to normal men and women. These drugs can leave you sterile, infertile, impotent. Joe Biden and the New Left even promote surgery on teens and young adults, removing breast and genitals. They want boys in our daughters' bathrooms and sports teams. And now, the Biden administration is planning to issue new rules that would force doctors to prescribe dangerous drugs and worse. Tell Joe Biden and left-wing leaders across America, hands off our kids. Paid for by America First League.
Okay. Like, so offensive on so many levels. Those are cities with really large Black populations, right? So for those cities, they are running this ad that sounds like every stereotype of the down home Black guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that will appeal to all Black. For sure, people like Black people in Detroit will hear this guy and be like, oh, he's like me. Like, that's, first of all, just so racist. It's so gross. They're using these racial stereotypes to pander to people of color. The NAACP president, Derek Johnson, says the NAACP has actually sent letters to radio stations asking them not to play this ad. He says, this is playing to the lowest common denominator of hate and othering, targeting the LGBT community. When you create this type of negative reaction to individuals who don't present any societal grief, you only create space for people to feel justified for attacking them physically and through public policy.
And think about also the people who are hurt most by high levels of social transphobia. If you go and look at the list that gets published every year for Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is actually coming up somewhere in the next few weeks, you will see that almost every single transgender person who has been killed in the United States in the last year will be a person of color, mostly Black and Latinx. And so it's especially horrible to pretend as though, you know, trans people are a threat to those communities and a threat to their values, when in actuality, trans people exist in those communities and they are the most victimized by the policies and attitudes that you are promoting.
Really disheartening. And like he said, you know, creating this environment where people think it's okay to attack these people physically and through policy. Like, these ads are harmful. Like, even though we can kind of laugh at them because they're ridiculous, they also create a really harmful environment. Such a small portion of the population is transgender. Like, their lives don't really affect anyone else. Creating the impression that parents have something to fear from a group of people that, like, if their children encounter a transgender person, like, most likely won't even know they're transgender, an adult, right? It's putting a spotlight on something and saying that it's dangerous when it doesn't need to be an issue. It shouldn't be an issue. It's not an issue. In fact, a poll just released by Data for Progress shows that a majority of voters think the anti-trans ads are out of hand. And according to this survey, 58% of independents and even 41% of Republicans, which is not insignificant, think political attack ads against the transgender community have gotten mean-spirited and out of hand. So even people that, like, have no love for supporting transgender rights, quite a few of them are like, this is, like, mean and unnecessary. We went for a really long time without there being legislation having anything to do with transgender people. And then it turned out to be a topic that could get people worked up. And so then all of a sudden there's like this flood of anti-trans legislation, not because society has shown a need for it so much as it's a good way to get votes, I guess.
The thing is, it, again, like we've said repeatedly, is it really though? Because it's not something that people are voting on. The only reasonable explanation that I have really seen in all the analysis I've read is that they're hoping that it will appeal to some of the suburban white female voters who have, for obvious reasons, been increasingly not supporting Republicans, especially since 2022 when Roe v. Wade was overturned, and that this is sort of an attempt to try to stem the bleeding in that demographic.
What Republican can, because it hasn't, like in the midterms, supporting anti-trans policies was not a winning strategy.
Right.
What Republican campaign officials and political strategists are saying now is that even though these aren't top of mind issues for most people, they're effective as a wedge issue for those who are still trying to decide. And they think the strategy will be particularly effective with culturally conservative suburban women and, like you said, with Black and Hispanic voters. And for, like the stuff, like the ads targeting Jon Tester, that because there are Democrats running as moderates in some very red states, like Montana, or even swing states that, can lean either way, they hope that by painting these Democratic candidates as too liberal, they will still get people to lean conservative. That's why they think it will work this time.
It's just confusing because all of those things would theoretically have been true last time they tried it if they were going to be true. And so that's what I'm getting at, is that we have quite a lot of evidence, like you said, right? Not a top of mind voting issue, and a plurality of people who even already lean towards supporting Republicans are put off by these ads. We have evidence from past elections showing that it's not an effective strategy. And so it's just very weird to me that there's this, again, a third of the budget, right, is being spent on this campaign against trans people specifically. It begins to feel like maybe it isn't even about winning the election so much as just some people really hate trans people.
Well, I think that can also be true. I was talking to your dad about this, and his theory is that Republicans know they most likely can't get a majority of regular voters. So his theory is that by focusing on an issue like this, that will infuriate a certain kind of person, that they will activate people who don't usually vote. I'm picturing like the mob with the pitchforks, get them so worked up about this that they wouldn't normally vote, and they'll go like, well, we can't have this happening. And then maybe if they can get some of the non-voters outraged enough to show up, they think that could be the path to victory.
Maybe, but it doesn't make sense to me from the perspective of which races they're using the strategy in, or like maybe just the fact that they're using the strategy so broadly. Like in Texas, for instance, it's a closer race than it has been, in part because of Texas's changing demographics. But it seems to me that you run just as much risk of mobilizing people who might not have voted, but they see, oh my God, Republicans are making trans people's rights a big focus, which means that they're going to be focused on taking away trans people's rights once they're in office. I better go out and vote, even though I wouldn't have necessarily supported the Democratic candidate or voted a Democratic ticket previously. It just doesn't make sense to me as a strategy.
I guess that would be the risk with that. Yeah, I mean, I guess we don't, that was just a theory. We'll see, I guess. We'll see. But yeah, there's a lot at stake, obviously, for so many reasons. But on this particular issue, these ads are damaging. And if this is successful, and, some of these candidates hopefully are just using this to get elected and won't do much with it. But if they do, I mean, we know now that this legislation is harmful. James Black, the CEO of the Trevor Project, says it is without question that anti-transgender policies and the dangerous rhetoric surrounding them take a measurable toll on the health and safety of transgender and non-binary young people all across the country. We've seen that states that have enacted anti-transgender legislation have seen statistically significant increases in suicide attempts among trans and non-binary young people in the first year after these laws have gone into effect. There's real danger here. maybe it is a strategy. Maybe it's just using this to get people worked up. But sometimes using a topic to get people worked up leads to action. If January 6th taught us anything, it's that there are a lot of violent, unhinged people out there that don't need a lot of encouraging to act out their worst impulses. So,
well, and also what it taught us is that the Republican Party as a political institution is not functional anymore. It has no internal dissent mechanism, right? Like Republicans are basically just going to go along with whatever the prevailing message from the top is. And so if Trump is out there saying trans people bad, then even if they don't really care, and even if, they just viewed it as a political tool to get into office, like when Marjorie Taylor Greene introduces a bill to, do whatever, federally ban trans girls from playing sports, they're going to go along with it. Right. We've seen it already, actually, with, say, Spencer Cox in Utah, where initially he vetoed the sports bill that the legislature passed, which they then went back and got a supermajority to override the veto. And then this year, with the whole San Jose State volleyball player controversy thing, where a couple of Utah schools said that they were going to forfeit to San Jose State because there was a transgender volleyball player on their team. He was like, yes, I stand with these schools. This is the correct decision, unfair, bad, trans people, evil, et cetera, right? And so we see it repeatedly, right? We saw it in the aftermath of January 6th. Initially, you have some people who are like, maybe trying to violently overthrow the democratic transfer of power is a bad thing. And then 6 months later, they've all gotten in line, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah. Because then you have to be loyal, I guess, to the party. And yeah, I'm so ready for this election to be over and to hopefully go in a good direction.
Yeah.
That'll be nice to be out of the country for it.
Yeah.
So on our next episode, on a similar vein, we are going to talk about how there is really no such thing as being apolitical or politically neutral.
Yeah, it's something I run into relatively frequently where people will be like, I don't disagree with you, but why are you talking about it so much? I'm just not that into politics and I don't like talking about politics. And I'm like, nah, mate, we're talking about something that you kind of need to have a stance on because the options are either human rights yes or human rights no.
And inaction is a choice.
Yes, inaction is political. And everything we do is political. And if you drill down far enough, and we will expand on that.
Everybody take care of yourselves over the next couple of weeks. Do what you need to do to keep yourself sane. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, interesting, or just mildly amusing, please consider rating and reviewing us on your podcasting platform of choice. It really helps us to get the word out there and spread this information as far as we can.
And as always, check out our website at queerkidsstraightmom.com or visit us on Facebook, Queer Kid Straight Mom, Instagram at queerkid.straightmom, or Twitter at queerkidstr8mom.
And if you're feeling especially generous, please consider joining our Patreon by searching Queer Kids Straight Mom. It helps us fund this podcast.